Welcome to TradeTheNBI.com. This is John's report. It's for the 12th, and as you can see, with that rising short, they pretty much kept a lid on any positive activity coming out of this small increase here in short-term buyers with the steel rising. We do have orange falling, so if it breaks below the steel and steel is able to cross above, then you could have the breakout. But until that happens, there's sort of in a holding pattern as long as Power Mode 2 up here in the plus 13 range holds on and starting to fade just a little bit. And that's what happens when it's just sort of like they're running out of gas and you're just kind of coasting at this particular point. Now the question is, will there be enough short activity that's able to drive things down? Not so much at this particular point, but we're in a soft spot here with the red DSC. It's just sort of flat line. If it began to trail off a little bit, then I think we would probably begin to see some of that failing. The shakeout's also still fairly weak. And I talked about this before. You've got higher highs on lower shakeout reading. It tends to not end well if you're thinking about breakout to the upside. But it can reset and start a new cycle. It's just a matter of getting in congruency with the readings. So the NASDAQ a little bit better off than the S&P was, but still identical from its reading standpoint. What I'm looking for is a breakout of the magenta and green here. So like when they're together and they break out, usually you get more of a directional move. When that takes place, it hasn't happened yet. So we're just in a pause. And it's not surprising at the mid-level of the month. In the euro, again, everything's still on hold while we wait for the finalization of the impeachment trial, because it can't really do any business until that's concluded. So everything waits till then. So it's just going to be a question of, do you think things are still on track or not? And again, this is still higher than the euro really justifiably can be given the condition of the eurozone. But when you're battling central banks, the Fed is always going to win because they are the biggest. And like we've talked about before, gold certainly under pressure from the lack of inflation. You're already seeing an increased amount of border traffic in the U.S., which is certainly going to put pressure on wages to the downside, which ideally helps keep inflation under control in that, because wage increase next to energy is most important. We'll see if the squeeze on energy, though, will have an impact later on. That would be the only negative aspect, at least positive for gold moving forward. From an intraday standpoint, we'll get a slide back a little bit. That's the current part of the day. It was pretty clean action. I think everything was fairly simple, straightforward. By the time we got into the mid-morning and stuff, we started to get our DOC spreads. Those led to some modest pullbacks. We kept getting that, like I talked about, the steel dipping below the zero, then you're just looking for that orange to break under, and if it doesn't, it's pretty soft at that particular point. So as you can see, very modest in its move right here, because you really only got just the green going above, which that's enough right there to give it a little bit of a push. But and then the rising red gave just enough to keep it going, but really couldn't break out from where the previous highs were. So when the next set of weakness came on the spider right here, you literally had that breakdown that started. If you had the green slightly below, it would have been easier to catch the very peak of that, but it's okay, that happens. But when it did start to break again, now you started making successively lower highs, which is interesting because it's something that you see parallel in the daily configuration of just kind of stalling out, not able to push through. And I'm going to look at coding on this because we should have turned when we went to negative shakeout red on this. So I will verify what happened with that if there's an anomaly, because it was pretty clean with these configurations. Again, that steel with the orange spike. Definitely a short configuration. That led us just to fill in all of the positive extreme setups from before. And you notice how this upper one right here became then the ceiling of where price was. So clearly algo was activating here to move for lower. Once it got to the lower one, kept going. And now we've conveniently hit that 3885 right down here, which is the last one from before, and it just beautifully struck off that, and that's when it started to build some momentum going towards the end of the day. We ended up with another series of positive extremes that, the first one that was right here on that breakout, but it was so close to the other previous one, was in a certain market, and we ended up with a little bit higher level, but again, still very close, right around that 450 range, so pretty close to where the previous one was, and of course that's still back already here in pre-market. In fact, we came all the way back down to retouch where the dip below the red line here and the magenta and the extreme. Sharply filled it in there, and again, this is that positive one where you have the move above the zero and then back below, and then sure enough, once the orange dip. Nice carry through. Beautiful how that works. Nice and clean. And also the steel crossing above. So just the inverse of the negative short side of it. All in all, pretty clean action. But while we're at it, we can take a look at Bitcoin. It's still hovering up around near the peaks. A little bit of softness right now. We can get the steel rising here and orange falling. If that turns, we might see a little bit further break back down. We've got some positive extreme action that takes us all the way back to the 45.8 range. So I wouldn't be surprised to see that fill, but pretty clean. And then, of course, the favorite, as we've talked about, is interesting how we're hovering right along that 42 is that final positive extreme that we were looking for fill at. Been slightly above it, but you can see that from that sellback of 337, what a collapse all the way back to what we expected, which was the fill of all of these going forward as soon as the excess momentum faded out, and that's exactly what you get. As always, anything unique or special, I will certainly put on the Skype chat. Trade well. We'll talk to you later.